that you can comfortably subscribe to the idea that law has to be different from everything else. Now, natural law theory actually doesn't make that distinction. That is, they do make a distinction between other things like law and force and law and politics, etc. But as far as morality goes, the natural law emphasis is that for human law to be called law, it has to be in conformity with some higher principles. Whether you find those higher principles in universal laws like we were talking about, or in modern times what Finis is talking about. So basically what has happened is that natural laws way of thinking that you can have access to this higher morality, and that is necessary for something to be called law, got challenged by the rise of enlightenment way of thinking and the emphasis on positivist basis of knowledge. So when I say positivist basis of knowledge, what do people understand by that? Do you know what I'm talking about? Davis has something to say about that. If anyone has done that reading, those of you who have the reading, does anyone want to help me? Otherwise, I'll have to do all the talking. So, where does your knowledge come from? So, what do you call any information that you have is not called knowledge. So, for something to be called valid knowledge, it has to have some, if you like, valid source of authority. Yeah. So, how do you know something is valid knowledge? I'm saying it, I'm your tutor, you have no reason to disagree with me, will that do? Why not? I'm marking your papers. So, yeah. Yes. So this is the point that I want you to think. So Supreme Court judge says it becomes knowledge. Your teacher says it becomes knowledge. In other words, knowledge is information that is being passed to you. Yeah.
Ma'am, unlike in naturalistic way of school of thinking, in positivistic, reason is given way more importance than conforming to higher morality, I can say. So reason, if I would say something which is against morality, but I have a good reason, that would be accepted in positivistic school.
Okay. That's one way of putting it, but yeah, you made the right point that basically in pre-enlightenment era, if I can call it that, what constitutes knowledge is it comes from a higher source. That higher source is very often religious or theological sources, but with the rise of enlightenment, with the rise of so-called scientific thinking, that way of ascribing authority to a higher source got challenged. So what positivists are saying is that for something to constitute knowledge, it should be able to be proved to be the case. So how do you prove something to be the case is the parallel rise of scientific way of thinking is basically that empirical proof is required for any claim that you are making that this is how things are. Now, positivist way of thinking is our current way of thinking. And legal positivism is a development in this milieu also. But legal positivism is actually not basing itself on empirical truths of the law. So you have to grasp this point that generally speaking, positivist way of acquiring knowledge or constituting knowledge is to say that we can empirically test it, we can see whether what you're saying is the case or not. And legal positivism happens to be one disciplined way of using positivism. But legal positivism is actually not relying on the empirical truth of the matter. So what is legal positivism basing itself on? So when I say legal positivism, I assume that all of you understand there is a thinker called Austin and there's a thinker called Hart and the rest of them. So what are they saying? Why is their definition of law something that you and I should subscribe to? Okay, let's start with Austin. So what is Austin getting at? That first of all, in positivism, big emphasis is on identifying law as separate from everything else. That is, validity of law is not coming from outside of law. So it is not religion that validates law, it is not politics that validates law. Law is valid on its own premises. That is, it is an autonomous system of thought, or an autonomous system, or a, let's call it an autonomous system.
Source where it comes from. We say law is valid because it comes from the parliament or
That's
from.
the definition. That's the definition of law that the positivists have given it. What I'm saying is, think about it. Why do the positivists have the authority to give us that definition? What entitles them to say that law is something that comes from the right pedigree, that has the right source or pedigree? I could say something else. Would you believe it? I may be the Supreme Court judge. Would you believe it? The point I'm trying to make is that it is not only a matter of that sufficient numbers of us subscribe to that view and that's why it is valid. That's not the point. So it's not based on that 90% of the people think like this and that's why this is the correct definition of law. That would make it sort of dependent on empirical proof. So we just said that positivist legal thought is not depending on empirical evidence to validate its claims. So how is it validating its claims? In other words, the reverse exercise is that this is the definition given by positivists. Why should I believe it? Remember my example a little while ago when I had said that my definition of a swan is that it is a white bird. Actually, I never got to finish it, did I? That a black swan, yeah, I did finish it. Yeah. So a black swan is not a swan by definition. So just because you see a black bird is like you're saying that empirically your claim is not true. That empirically it's incorrect. But the difference between a conceptual claim and an empirical claim is that conceptual claim is based upon certain ways of thinking. And what is legal positivism doing? It is using certain ways of thinking. What are its certain ways of thinking is that it is using conceptual categories. So what are the conceptual categories it is using? Basically, an Austin comes along and says, well, how do we decide when something is law is that what is the function of law in any society is to maintain order. How can order be maintained? That it is the sovereign who gives a command that is backed by sanction, that would fulfill that function. Fair enough? How can you disagree with that? So I'm taking it that all of you are familiar with Austin's definition of law. Is that correct? Or I can repeat it. So according to Austin, who's our most famous legal positivist to start the discussion, is basically giving us this definition of law. Should I accept it? What reason do you have not to accept it? I mean, you can't just be arbitrary. I don't want to accept, so I will not do it. But do you have any reason to accept it? Come on, people. You're going to spend the rest of your life talking about Austin.
Because it's very mechanical and my ideas are not too mechanical. So that's the reason I will not be subscribing, because the way positivist idea or ideology is, it's some more mechanical. This is for that and that is for this. But ideas as such are not too mechanical.
Okay, am I correct? I may not be correct, but am I correct that what you're saying is mechanical can be said logical? We'll come back to that. I think I know what you're saying, but I'm not sure.
Ma'am, I don't agree with what he said, that it's very mechanical. I think it is way more rational and it is way more stable. It draws conclusion on something which we all can at a certain level agree with. So that is the reason I would agree with positivistic school.
So this is the second time I've heard the same sort of opinion from your side. So I have a sort of a open-ended question for you. So there's this case that we study in international law. It's called the Southwest Africa case. The facts of the matter are more or less that there's apartheid in Southwest Africa, which is run by an external government from South Africa, and it is taken to the International Court of Justice, right? The question, and it's taken by two states, Liberia and Ethiopia. So the court basically goes into the question whether or not they have jurisdiction, and the majority opinion agrees with you. Fitzmaurice states that we as judges appreciate vast violations of humanitarian laws. We understand that there are social factors and religious factors and racial factors at play. However, as judges, we can only apply the correct legal view. The one that you say is much more rational. Is that the sort of society we really want? Because a lot of people then went on to sort of question the view. So I would personally believe, and I'll sort of just take that discussion forward, what ends up happening is vis-a-vis positivism in that limited sense, the idea of the correct legal view, one which is acceptable to all, is a view which is coming from a white civilized sort of world. Does it take into account the vast practices of racial discrimination through the idea of colonialism in vast majority of the world? So can we then state that that positivist law, that judges only apply law and nothing outside, and therefore because Liberia and Ethiopia aren't affected, therefore have no standing? Would that be the correct sort of idea? Like, that's worth considering.
And more than that, just to soften the the argument, yeah, we'll just disregard him. Rather than saying is that the correct way of thinking, is I think we can say, because that is the point, that there is no way we can decide that one is the correct way of thinking, the other is not. What is being said here is that you look at the consequences of this line of reasoning. So if you end up justifying inequalities, unfairness, discrimination, etc., by virtue of your understanding of this is what constitutes law, then this is what we were saying for previous 2 days. Isn't that something that I should be taking on board, that should my definitions be more sort of open to questioning, etc.? Yeah.
In no way that I'm agreeing that inequality should be it should be promoted, but what I'm saying is, here you can question my rationale, you can question the logic I'm using, rather than blatantly stating that no, it conforms with a higher morality. That is the reason I'm more inclined towards positivistic, because it gives you a good point to challenge on, rather than just basically agreeing to something which has been followed. So that is what this is the main reason why I think positivistic way of thinking is way more reliable.
Yes, it's more definite and it's something that we can run with, etc.
Yeah.
But also there is a problem, and I think that's what you're getting at, is that because we have that comfort with it, we are used to thinking like that, etc., we don't actually see that there's nothing objective about it. It just happens to suit us, most of us, to think like that, but it doesn't actually suit everyone to think like that. So the point is, what we are thinking is that the most, I can't use the word correct now, is that the most suitable way of thinking.
Ma'am, but positivistic way of thinking is open to criticism and is open to being modified rather than naturalistic way of thinking.
Rather than natural, we're not going there. So we've left natural law for the time being. But with our understanding of how positivist definition of law is made, what I'm asking you to think through is that positivist, or Austin, just to make it very specific, is saying that this is a function that every society requires. And here is how this function can be performed. That is, if there is a sanction that can be enforced and the sanction comes from a sort of a legitimate authority, then we have got law. Now, what Austin is saying is that these are requirements that are objective requirements of every society. So here is an objective definition of law. Do you get the point? That he is not saying that I am working in England of a certain historical period and the current political turmoil in England is that requires sort of bolstering political authority of the sovereign, and that this definition performs that function. That would make it a very, very localized and specific definition which applies to England of that time, but doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else has to conform to that definition of law. So the point of the example is that when you make claims of objectivity and universality, basically what you are saying is that my definition is independent of what's happening around me. I don't have to take into account social realities, political realities, or economic realities. I can give you an objective definition, and because it is an objective definition, it can travel the world, which it has done with the help of all the colonization that has happened with the colonizers imposing their law on colonized countries in the name of that this is the way to think about it. You got the point? That if they had said that this is a specific definition, historically contingent, then we don't get that purchase of saying that everyone else can live by this definition.
No, I was see, one understands the whole privileging that we do of logic and of rationality. And evidently, if you are like, it's like as simple as that the class will start at 5 o'clock, it will end at 8 o'clock. If supposing we were to say that, all right, by your use of higher reason, let us find out there's a class at 2:30, there's another class, and this class, you catch me if you can, kind of stuff. You know, we are playing it that way. Evidently, it would be like, some of us will attend classes on some days, others will be like moving around the rest of the university, may not find what is happening. So there are places wherein that kind of a very amoral, I'm not saying immoral, but it's not no moral content to it. It's more to do with practicality, with the fact of that certain things have to be done. And if you clearly tell people how and when they will happen, they will happen. And that seems to be the what is enamoring you with positivism, because there is a certain, you know, like if I need to know what is the rule which is being followed at Nalsar University, I can look at their rules and regulations and proceed from there. And I can then equip myself as to how to deal with the place I am in. The point which I suppose in some manner one is trying to ask is that supposing the whole process by which we make these rules and regulations, though they are very certain and clear, they are then saying that, okay, excepting for, you're coming into say, do a Gyan course at Nalsar University as an external person here. And supposing our rules and regulations were to be saying that all external people will only be able to attend 2/3 of the class, the 1/3 class is only for Nalsar students. It's put there, we have our academic council, our executive council, whatever is the process by which, and we are openly declaring it that this is what our rule is. Is there something in the rule itself which seems like the critiquing will necessarily have to come from outside of the rule? We'll have to find out, this is unfair. I paid as much. We say no, but like all our facilities are not equivalent to. Our students are doing, I mean, whatever kind of, see, when you're privileging one group of people over another by a rule which has gone through the whole process, is there something not right about it? When we kind of say rational, logical, I mean, this one was gross, what I'm saying, but it's like somewhere, sometimes you have to say the gross thing, because if you then look at the fact that there is a well-established system of apartheid, which the people in that country possibly could not challenge, because there was no room whatsoever by which they could challenge it. You were so regimented there that there was no scope whatsoever by which you could challenge it. So they go to an international fora, and what is it that that forum is doing? It is saying you are not, like you are challenging it in the name of justice or in the name of fairness or equality, but you are not the people who has the locus standi to be able to do it. You don't have the standing. Only the people from that country could come, when we know all the rules in the way in which they are made in that country make it impossible for that anybody from that country to come. So logical, true. But sometimes when through the process of logic, you come and set up a whole system and then leave no elbow room for other people, then what do? That's positivism, or more importantly, more than positivism, because Hart, when he brings in the notions of legitimacy and he brings in the whole business of that, you know, it's not just the gunman putting his gun on your head, but you should internally feel obliged to follow. You know, he is critiquing Austin there. But if we just stay with Austin and we say command of the sovereign, whoever are the people in authority, they have laid down a certain set of principles and we have to follow them. And that is logical, certain, no doubt about it. But it is the certainty of the dead. It is a certainty by which you will die. That's for sure. So do we still subscribe to it, or is there something difficult or problematic? That's the basic thing. See, one is not asking for a yes-no answer. The idea of these classes is we worry. Yeah. We have anxiety. We are, oh my God, but what is this? If I'm really faced up with such a rule, what do I do? Where will I evoke my critique from? Will it come from within positivism? That's the question. Get it?
And more than that, it's also like it's not only an individual
See,
crusade
I'm
that
not doing a back and forth. I'm just wanting to reflect on it, because what the trigger that point happens is I'm not even asking you to give me an answer. And I'm perfectly happy with your staying with your position. I'm only trying to get, because we need to sort of, what I'm only trying to get you to reflect upon is then when you privilege logic or you privilege rationality, you also privilege the rationality of some over others. You privilege the authority of whoever is in authority, then starts to say their authority is quote unquote truth. That's the only point I wanted to reflect on. You can come back and have other class. I just also, I'm sorry, I'm getting into the mic. You have one. Yeah.
So basically, what we are getting at here is that positivism comes and it wants to get away from this notion that law can be validated by reference to morality, and it ends up with this definition. Now, we are used to that definition, we are comfortable with that definition, does not make it the truth of the matter. So the point about analyzing how Austin reaches the definition that he reaches is basically by looking at that he is saying that every society requires the law to perform this function. Therefore, every society should have enforceable rules, but not rules, any rules. It has to be rules coming from the sovereign in the sense of political sovereign. Now, what has Austin done in this sense is told you that this is valid legal authority. What he hasn't told you is that is it something that you and I can live by, and that's what Hart is doing by critiquing Austin and saying, but your law looks like the gunman's rule. That is, there is no legitimacy to it. Do you see the point, the difference between valid authority and legitimate authority? That is, you cannot have a society where law is not considered legitimate by most of us. So law requires to have valid authority and requires to have legitimate authority, and Hart's solution to the problem is basically, I'll come to the solution in a minute, but you have to recognize that everything that Hart is saying is, he is trying to say that there is a distinction between law and force. So earlier on we said, is there a distinction between law and morality? And positivists are saying definitely yes. Now we are looking at, is there a distinction between law and force? And Hart's answer, it has to be. Because law by definition cannot be unregulated force. Okay? How does he manage to do that? He says, Austin told us that law is a set of rules. I am telling you, law is not only one set of rules, it is actually two sets of rules. That there are primary rules and there are secondary rules. And legal systems that don't have secondary rules, by definition, do not have a legal system. Okay, are you with me on this point? So our function in Hart giving this definition is that there were certain deficiencies in Austin's definition of law. I have supplied that part and told you that law and force can be should be clearly distinguished. But in the process, what has happened is that he is saying, unless your system has these two sets of rules, I'm not going into the details of what primary rules and secondary rules, I take it that you know it. Legal systems or systems that don't have secondary rules, by definition, do not have law. Okay. Why? Why should I believe Hart? What gives him the right to say that secondary and primary rules together constitute a legal system and nothing else would reach that status of a legal system unless it has those secondary rules?
And when we speak about just force, there will be some kind of rebellion against that force. So that's where I see the difference why Hart says that law versus force, like force is very how to say, like
I get.
sorry.
So I get it that unless it is legitimate, considered legitimate by everyone, we'll not call it law, right?
मतलब force is just force. Gunman. So that's where he is drawing, I guess.
Is everyone happy with that understanding? So law is only law if there is a combination of primary and secondary rules, and it enables us to distinguish naked force from legal force. But what about this idea that if you don't have secondary rules, then you don't have law? You might have customs, you might have a primitive system of rules, but you're not entitled to call yourself a legal system. Where has this philosophy been used? Is again in justifying colonialism, amongst other things. That is, countries have felt justified in going to other societies and saying, we'll tell you what a legal system is, we'll give you the institutions that are required. It is not open to the receiving countries to say, thank you very much, we were doing all right, we will manage even now. No. Why not? Because of the dominance of this idea that we are giving you a rational, objective, universal definition of law. How can you disagree with that? What happens to my cultural practices? What happens to my differences than you, etc.? What is the answer of positivists? Law has nothing to do with. Law has nothing to do with morality, not only morality, cultural differences, political systems, and rest of the society. Law is independent of what exists outside of it. So, with the result that that kind of a law can be transported anywhere. So, the same law can then apply to Papua New Guinea, and it can apply to India, and it can apply to Africa, and it comes from mostly from England. Doesn't matter. Do you see the hegemony of ideas that is happening through the use of objective definitions? So Hart's definition is also like Austin's definition, not a definition that takes into account that these are the requirements of my society, and this is what logical definition of law can be. No, he is saying this is a universal definition of law. The point that I am trying to make throughout is that claim that what I am giving you is universal and objective is the issue that we need to deal with. So the example that that was used earlier on, and about South Africa having certain kinds of apartheid laws, is also replicated in the legal literature by showing us that when Nazi regime was defeated, basically 2/3 of the world had to come together to defeat them, to go to war and have so much carnage. After the war had ended, and when certain people were tried for crimes committed under the Nazi laws, the argument of the defense was, you can't prosecute me, what I did was legal. Do you get the point? That horrible things that were done were actually done as legal acts at the time. Now that the regime has been defeated, you cannot turn around and say at that time what you did was problematic. Here you go to war with somebody, you have huge human cost and other costs, to end up in a court system where you are basically saying that because what was done was legal, what are you prosecuting me for? The response of the tribunal was that those laws were so horrible that we cannot possibly call them laws, and that's why you have to be prosecuted. Hart's response to that as a jurisprudent was basically, that's the wrong way to go about it. A law is a law is a law. It has nothing to do with whether it is moral or not moral. You want to prosecute those people, you don't want to let them go, make a retrospective law. But don't mix law and morality. Okay?
Absolutely wrongly. But when Hart comes in and he's talking about secondary rules, and we talk about recognition, adjudication, change, to some extent wasn't there that element of, okay, at some point the law started off with recognition by a community, and over a period of time it didn't get changed. So in there, and that was basically what I was talking about, and now I fear that I have really messed up in that paper, but in there weren't we bringing in that element of morality, at least from that avenue, wherein we were saying that a community was involved in forming laws, in forming, at least at this at the secondary rule, the premise of law, and then over a period of time we stopped ignoring and maybe didn't question the morality element as much. But as opposed to, say, Austin, Hart did bring in morality more in the conception of positive law.
He did, but not in the definition itself. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, in Hart's understanding, how do you define something as law is basically by referring to the rule of recognition and saying that rule of recognition allows you to test whether something is a legal rule or not. But what is the rule of recognition in any system? Is the rule of recognition a legal rule or not? Do you understand what I'm asking about? So basically what Hart is saying is that primary rules are rules of do's and don'ts. Secondary rules are which allow you to have an institutional structure, and whether anything is a rule of law or not is referred to ultimately to the rule of recognition. Rule of recognition basically then decides for you law and not law. Is the rule of recognition a legal rule or not a legal rule? How would you decide? Rule of recognition is the one that decides whether something is law or not law. How would you decide whether it itself is law or not law? So the point being that at the highest level, the connection between society and law has to be acknowledged even for positivists. And the second point that you're making is that Hart is saying that this rule of recognition is not your standard kind of legal rule, but rather it is what the officials of the system agree to accept as a rule of law. In that sense, you can say that public consensus or morality comes into validating the entire legal system, because they are the ones who decide whether something is a rule of recognition or not. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying? Kind of? Okay. If that is the case, then what are we getting at is that the claim of positivists that law and non-law can be clearly demarcated comes apart. That is, even for positivists, it becomes problematic to make this clear distinction between what is law and what is not law. What is the motto of the story for us? That this aspiration that law should be able to be defined as not connected to its surroundings is the problem. And it is precisely because of these kinds of claimed not connection that you have situations of Nazi Germany. That is, excesses that were committed by legal means is what gives rise to modern natural law, in that basically the argument is that this notion that anything that has a correct pedigree and that's why it is law basically makes it possible for anything to be enacted as law. That is, you have no constraints. You want to enact a law saying that all people of African origin can be put in a concentration camp, or people of Jewish extraction can be put in a concentration camp, they can be gassed. It's all legal. Is that the kind of society we want in the name of scientific thinking? So it's not only an impersonal question, it becomes very much a question of, if I subscribe to positivist thinking in this kind of which is like a logical extreme of it, am I not in the business of justifying a hopelessly oppressive possibility? So it may not happen, but the possibility exists. And can you then blame somebody else for it? I have nothing to do with it. If enough of us were questioning positivism for the excesses that it can allow, wouldn't it be possible to think that dominant thinking about law may no longer be positivist? Your point that Hart actually was acknowledging that there is a connection between law and morality to a larger extent than Austin was doing was basically after giving this definition, Hart is saying, but in practice it is true that legislators will not go to the extremes because they need legitimacy. That is, if my government starts making all sorts of horrible laws, people will start reacting against it. But that has nothing to do with the possibilities of this definition. Okay. If I can get you to accept this point, then I think I've been successful in the evening. That is, Hart's definition of law basically allows for extremism of any kind. In practice, he is saying it doesn't happen, but that doesn't absolve him of giving you a definition where basically the legislators are not constrained by very much.
But the fact that within his definition, people, the communities of people broadly can check upon what is coming out as positive law, doesn't that in itself curb his definition and does not allow for such extremities?
You mean the rule of recognition?
Yeah,
people?
exactly. Because so, and now I can't, that's what I was trying to remember and recall how there was some text which said that so Hart, in his conception, in his definition of law, would never, has basis for saying that that Nazi rule could never be seen as law. And that was stemming from the rule of recognition point, and I'm just, the life of me, I can't remember what that link was, but like it was.
They're finding people guilty of, the very fact that they followed the law which came in from a democratically elected regime. See, it's extremely important not to forget that. It came in from a democratically elected regime, and yet Hart is saying that if you are punishing people for following that law, you could only punish them if you first change that law. So he wants his rules of amendment or whatever to come into play, to amend it and amend it retroactively and then punish people. I mean, what is this convolution game? One. Two, I suppose one would also have to ask whether the tribunal was right. If you are really, if you will have to then say that when people go ahead and follow it, it is a victor's justice that you are then punishing them for it. So you'd have to, and that's where, and I suppose the next guy comes in, that all right, can rules really take care of it all? If you're just going to stay within rules, then, okay, it's like, all right, you can say that when people obey an immoral law, then people can be punished for it. That's the retrospective rule he would be making. That cuts at the root of positivism.
It does, but it doesn't also in the sense that retrospectivity, people understand what is meant by retrospectivity. Technically, it is allowable, but when you think about its connection to legitimacy of that system, if your legal system had retroactive rules happening all the time, the legitimacy of that system would be completely shot, right? So the point I think that Amita is making is that does this really save your definition by saying that you will have to acknowledge that law is law because it is correctly enacted, but if you find it too uncomfortable, let's make another law which repeals those laws but after the effect. after the event.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's where I was looking at your next thing on Dworkin, and I also felt that when Fuller puts up his whole inquiry against retrospectivity, and I mean, though he allows for it within the inner morality, he does allow for it. It is, it's like when you retrospectively wish to change because you have won the war. That for me is wherein the entire let's say the moral authority of the so-called victors also becomes hugely problematic.
Yeah, but that moral authority is what Hart tried to save by saying that people will not do that kind of thing very often. But it comes unstuck when he says that if you want to punish people for very horrible acts which were legal at the time, the only option you have is to declare them not legal but after the event. So the point being that he is holding on to this idea that a law has nothing to do for its validity. A law is not dependent on anything else for its validity other than the fact that it is correctly enacted, and in this case that it is conforming to its rule of recognition.
Ma'am, doesn't it become very precarious for us as citizens? For example, we'll be punished and we'll be put in jail for both during both the regimes. One, when if we follow our inner conscience, then we won't follow the laws. The old government will definitely penalize us, and whereas if we do, the new government will come into force and do that. So what are we supposed to do in such? Yeah.
And we are legal thinkers, and we have to think through that is positivism such a guarantee of safety for us or not?
Yeah.
So do you see the point that normally speaking we subscribe to positivism because it makes life predictable, it makes life a little bit manageable, if you like. But here is a conclusion to subscribing to positivism where somebody like Hart is saying, well, if you really push comes to shove, then we will make retrospective laws. What safety? Yeah, so the point being that this whole idea that definition of law is important so that it is not dependent on anything other than law is a peculiar concern of modern legal thinkers. So what is happening with Hart is basically his desire not to have to acknowledge that law is actually dependent on various other things for its authority, for its legitimacy. Now along comes Dworkin, and he says the problem that Hart is having is because he is thinking of law as only a set of rules or two sets of rules. So remember what had Hart said to Austin? Your definition is not adequate because you are thinking of laws as only primary rules. I am telling you it's a better definition that law is a combination of primary and secondary rules. Dworkin comes along and says, look, you're getting into all these problems because you don't understand law is not only rules, it is a combination of rules and principles. Okay? Now, if law is a combination of rules and principles, then what can we do? We can say that this rule doesn't yield the result that should happen. So we meaning the judges will be able to draw upon the principles that are available, combine them with the rules and give you a good judgment. The point here is, where do those principles come from? How do we have access to them? As we said yesterday, is only the domain of the judges, that they are the ones who are the repositories of this wisdom and they will be able to do the right thing. Question, can we rely on the judges to do the right thing? So what is the right thing that we are talking about is basically that we live in a rule of law situation rather than people's personal preferences. Okay, all this is happening because we want to be able to say that in a rule of law country, in a rule of law system, the law decides any dispute rather than the individual. I can rely on the law because the law is objective, the law is principled, the law is universal. It does not matter when I go to the law what my sex is, what my caste is, what my age is, what my financial position is. This is what is meant by law is universal, principled, and it applies to everyone the same way. The point is that this law is being defined by positivists for us as any rule that follows this X, Y, and Z is a rule of law. If it is a rule of law, then in a democratic country, the argument is that the judge has to apply it. Okay, we are coming almost a full circle from first day. But the point that I'm trying to make is that these theories of law are not kind of armchair kind of law happening. They have very real consequences. So what is Dworkin saying? You can trust the judge to, so what was the problem with Hart's definition of law was basically we are saying that anything that comes from the right source meaning the legislator for us, let's say, assuming that the legislator has the authority to make that rule. Any rule that they make is law. If it is law, I'm bound by it. If I'm bound by it, I end up in a situation like Nazi Germany. So Khushbu's point was that if I object to a morally corrupt law, I'm in trouble by the first government. If the government gets overthrown, I'm in trouble from the subsequent government because it is saying it was such a bad law that it wasn't law. So we are in a very precarious position. Now, Dworkin's answer is you're not in such a precarious position if you change your definition of law. So what is his definition of law? Is a supplement to Hart's definition in saying that law is not only a combination of primary and secondary rules, it is also, in addition to rules, it is also principles. All right, so I am now subject to this law and the judge has to apply this law. Can I have full confidence that the judge will do the right thing? Apply the law? Which principles the judge will choose is known only to the particular judge. Dworkin's answer is that you can trust that judge because the judge has a commitment to law's integrity. That is, the judge will give the best possible judgment in the circumstances. Would you feel confident to go to such a judge? I mean, you don't have much choice, but think about it. If that judge was not looking like you, would you be confident? The judge comes from the same social milieu that you do, has the similar education, has similar cultural values, and the rest of it. We can trust them to do the right thing. What if I don't come from the same social milieu or same social class or same gender or same sexuality? Can I trust the judge even then? I should be able to, but would I be able to if I don't even know what principles the judge has access to? Do you get the point that I'm trying to make? So legal theories are not sort of abstract ideas, they have very real consequences. And this is the point of critiquing them, that you work out what are the consequences of thinking like this. So the last part in Davis's chapter in this reading is basically she is using three ideas that are prevalent ideas in comparing natural law and positivists, and basically saying that um, um, positivists are saying that is and ought distinction is not maintained by natural lawyers. What is the point of that? That is and ought distinction is that positivists are saying natural lawyers have got it wrong, because they are saying, not saying that this is the law and stopping there, they are saying this ought to be the law. That is, from an is, they are getting a ought statement, which is not allowed in logical thinking. What Davis is getting at is that this is not just a kind of exercise in logical thinking, but the whole purpose of making this distinction is to be able to say whether laws are objective or not. And the point she is making with this is and ought distinction, law and morality distinction, and I think another thing she uses is the theory and practice distinction. She's saying all of them are efforts at trying to be able to argue that we can access objective truth of the law. And with regard to law and morality distinction, she has a very interesting example from the Australian context. And she's using it to kind of make this modern dilemma kind of real to you, is that if you are a judge in today's courts and there is a law that is hopelessly bad, do you have the option of saying it goes against my morality? I'm sorry, I cannot do anything about it. Can you do that? You're an officer of the legal system. You have to give an interpretation to a law that you do not agree with, cannot bear to give a judgment. Can you step back and say, the law is so bad that I'm not going to give you a judgment? If you do that, and we live in a positivist universe of legal positivism, wouldn't the whole system fall down? Think about it. All of you might be faced with this situation not so far in the future. What would you do?
For our legal system. So for a law to be valid, it'll have to meet the criteria laid down in the Constitution. So I don't see why that, I mean...
No. All that is taken care of.
Yeah.
This is a constitutional rule, but it is a rule that allows for an outcome that I simply cannot endure. So it's a legal rule, so there's no question of unconstitutionality or anything. So all practical purposes, it is a valid legal rule, but it is hopelessly immoral.
Procedure established by law is procedure established by law, and you'll find the situation. All you need to tweak from our constitution to that hypothetical country's constitution is that the fundamental rights can be abridged or put into abeyance if the president passes an order. Not even an emergency. If the president passes an order, then they can be put in abeyance. The president has passed an order, and our courts have understood procedure established by law as procedure established by law. I, as the president, then decide that a certain ethnical group is something that I am not agreeable with, and they shall be summarily executed. You are the judge, and you wish to disagree. Can you? That's the question.
So do you have any legal standing to be able to distance yourself from this horrible consequence of a legally valid rule? What do you think? The point of the question is to show you the limitations of positivist way of thinking. So it doesn't make it that because you have a positivist way of thinking, you end up with objective laws and they are kind of safe laws. The possibility exists that they may be objective, but they're not even objective. So it's only a claim that they are objective, and you can end up with these consequences. The example Davis uses in the book is that in Australia there was a big advertising board, like a huge billboard, where there were women. It was advertisement for undergarments for women. And basically these women, so there were scantily dressed women splashed like in huge sizes next to the road. These women went and slashed the billboard. And this magistrate then had to try them for defacing property and charge them under the relevant law. There is no dispute that this was defacing property, this was economic damage, but what the magistrate said was that I find it shocking that these women are before me being tried for a crime when the real crime is people who have objectified them in such graphic detail and sort of made them sex objects rather than treat them as human beings. I refuse to convict them on any grounds, because according to me the crime that has happened is against them rather than them committing the crime. The magistrate eventually lost her job. So the point that Davis is making is, what kind of a legal system is that does not allow internal critique, that does not allow examination of the consequences of its rules, all in the name of our definition of law. Okay, never forget that idea that all this is happening because we have subscribed to this positivist definition of law. So basically what the purpose of all this discussion is, for us to examine very, very carefully and very, very personally that is it all right to subscribe to a point of view just because it claims to be objective, just because it makes my life more comfortable. It is nobody else can do that for you. You can read any amount of literature, but ultimately it is up to you to decide what is it about this theory that is problematic, and the point then comes back to that you and I are in the business of endorsing or challenging ideas. So if we do not challenge them, then do not pretend that you are not complicit in atrocities happening in the name of law. So a Supreme Court judge which says this is what the law says and that's what it is equally complicitous in maintaining the possibility that dissent can be challenged. And which is a major point in positivism, that what positivists say is that basically if you don't agree with the law, go to your parliamentarians, tell them to change the law. So the avenue for change is the parliament rather than saying that this is not law. And think about it very, very carefully, that even if you don't go to your parliamentarians in this case, if you want to challenge it in the court, what confidence do you have that the judge will see it your way? That is Dworkin's judge who will use the right principles. So all this is happening, yes, but all this is happening in the name of objective definition of law. So I hope you are making the connection that theory is not something that happens in abstract. It has very real consequences. Okay, we shall call it a day, and we'll do the reading the next chapter for tomorrow. And the new people who have come, if you are interested in the readings, please try to give me a list of your emails, and I'll get one of these good people to everyone.